And we welcome you all to a webinar sponsored by the Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary. My name is Mark Sampson, and I'm your sponsor today, and I'll be introducing to you shortly Jared Olivetti, our main speaker for the day. Just a couple of things for you as we get ready to get started. If you're having any issues with audio or seeing the content, anything along those lines, you'll note a chat box in the left-hand side of the screen. You can use that, and I'll go ahead and get that message and be able to help you figure out whatever that issue might be. There's also a button that says Raise Flag, and if you hit that, I'll be able to, again, assist you in whatever way you want. Or if the whole thing just isn't working, you can email me at msampson@rpts.edu, and we will go ahead and take care of whatever problems you have in connecting. Also, use that chat box during the presentation to send questions that you might have for Pastor Olivetti. I will take those and we'll get them to him so he can answer those toward the end of our session today. And as always, our webinars are sponsored by RP Missions. We thank them for that. That's a wonderful service that they offer. Our guest today is Pastor Jared Olivetti. Jared is a native of Dayton, Ohio, and attended Purdue University, majoring in special education. While he was teaching junior high school, he really began to sense a call from God to become a pastor. He did an internship with Pastor Dave Long in Lafayette, Indiana. And then after graduating from RPTS in 2004, he became associate pastor at Lafayette, and then a couple years later was sent out and installed as a church planter there in the West Lafayette area of Indiana. Jared is married, and he and his wife have bucket loads of kids, which is always an exciting thing. And Jared, I think we're about ready to go, so you can take it from here.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. I would like to say first that I think Mark on the telephone sounds like an airline pilot, and he makes me feel like our plane will be on the ground soon. So I feel nice and comforted by that. I would like to pray this verse for us as we begin. So if you're somewhere where you can pray, let's do that. God, we thank you for technology, and we know that Jesus is the king of it, and we pray that our use of it today would be glorifying to him. We pray that our time together would result in abounding love and knowledge with discernment, so that we together and individually might be able to know what is excellent and that we might be better prepared for the coming of Christ. We pray for this in Jesus' name. Amen. So that verse that you hopefully see on your screen is my goal for today. The topic of technology and social media is so wide and encompassing that we have to narrow ourselves down quite a bit and cut out quite a bit. The one thing that I'm most passionate about is that the church and the leaders of the church be led to great discernment. Biblically, discerning means to cut between two things, to be able to tell what is true and what is false, what is good, what is bad, what's wrong, and what's right, and to be able to draw that line down the middle. And that's what we're going to try to do today in a little bit of time we have. We're going to focus on social media. We're going to particularly focus on Facebook. I don't tweet much. I have hopes that Twittering might die out pretty soon, but I don't think Facebook will, so we're going to go with that one. My secondary goal is to convince you to read these books. And lots of what I have to say has been learned from these authors. If I could pick them for you in order, I think the most important book for our topic today is the new book by Tim Challies, The Next Story, Life After the Digital Explosion. He does a great job coming at this topic from a biblical perspective. The book to its right, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains by Nicholas Carr, is not a Christian book, but it's an extremely important book showing how extended time on the permanent distraction of the internet really is making us dumber in many ways. And so it's a frightening book, but one that's worth reading. Andy Crouch's book on culture making is more broad, but very helpful and very engaging. It's not reformed, but it's very thoughtful and thought-provoking. So I do really want to encourage you to pick one of these books, pick them up if you don't have any of them, and pick one up and read it. I'm hoping to have our church go through the next story this summer in our book club. Whatever time you can give to these will be worth it. So those are my two goals for today, and I want to start by using something that Andy Crouch gives us in his book, Culture Making. He says that the church, in regards to culture and particularly for us today in regards to technology, has four general postures that we take toward any particular thing. And these four postures can be seen different parts of the church and major in different types of these postures. Let me go through them together and just think with you about how we do each of these with technology. The first thing that we are apt to do with technology is to condemn it. There are parts of the church, whether they're Amish or otherwise, that are quick to condemn technology, to simply push it out of their lives altogether. We do this with, some people do this with culture in general. We can do it with technology. Sometimes it just feels easier to not deal with things. The second thing we do is as a church, is we often critique it. Men like Carl Henry and Francis Schaeffer have been great critiques of culture, and we would assume of technology if they were here today. And we are, it is easy and good for the church at times to critique culture, to write about it, to think deeply about it. Other times the church simply copies what the world is doing. We look at what the world is doing. So the world is doing Facebook, and many mega churches these days have invented or taken on board really church versions of Facebook. There's lots of church social media designed for very large churches. Sometimes we simply copy what the world is doing. At worst, sometimes the church simply consumes what the world gives us without any thought whatsoever. And so Andy Crouch makes the point in his book that any of these four things can be appropriate at different times. The problem is when any one of the four become our natural inclination toward new things. When our first instinct is to condemn or to critique or to copy or to consume, there is a better way. And so the better way, he says, is the fifth way of cultivating. And of course, they all start with C's, so that makes us happy and we can remember it. It's sometimes good to condemn. It's sometimes necessary to critique or to copy, and sometimes okay to simply consume. Really, though, Crouch's book is a call for the church to be cultivating technology, to be cultivating culture. So in other words, we need to understand technology, its use and its effect, so we can weed out the bad parts and conserve the good. And if I've understood reading Crouch, practically what this means is three steps that I'm going to try to take us through briefly today. The first step is simply knowing what we're dealing with. We need to know this technology, and that doesn't mean getting to the right website, but we need to have thought deeply about these things that we're interacting with. Secondly, we need to weed the garden. We need to take out the things that are bad and get rid of them. And then thirdly, we need to conserve and to cultivate what is good. So this has been a helpful paradigm for me in terms of culture in general, but today especially in terms of using technology. A good quote before we go on from Crouch's book, he writes that the more each of us knows about our cultural domain, the more likely we are to create something new and worthwhile. And creation begins with cultivation, and cultural creativity requires cultural maturity. And we could substitute in that technology. Technological creativity requires technological maturity. We need to be wise and mature in our use of all these things. So, going on from there, the next thing that Crouch does in his book is to give 5 questions that help us get to know technology, get to know different types of culture. So again, I'm listing these right from Andy Crouch, except for the last one, which is an addition of mine. These are questions that I've used with our grad student group over the course of several weeks to simply get us to think deeply about different parts of culture What I want to do in a minute is to think with you through these questions about Facebook. So the questions first: what does this tech assume about the way the world is? What does it assume about the way the world should be? What does this technology make possible? What does it make impossible or very difficult? And what new forms of culture are created in response to this technology? Before we move on, I wanted to point out something that Nicholas Carr and Tim Challies both point out, and that is that we can never rely on the inventors of technology to discern their own technology. That 99 times out of 100, those who invent something will not be likely to think deeply about the effects of what they're inventing. Often they're so excited about it or whatever it is, other people need to come and need to think and need to be discerning. And so just because somebody's invented something doesn't mean they've really thought through the impact of it. So these are 5 good questions along with a 6th at the bottom. How does all of this jive with God's wisdom and call in my life? So think with me, if you would, about Facebook. Some of you are on Facebook. I'm looking at some of your names. I know you're on Facebook. Some of you are not on Facebook, and you know why you're not on Facebook. This isn't a right or wrong. It's simply a call to think deeply. So what does Facebook assume about the way the world is? To my eyes, Facebook assumes that the world is too disconnected. It assumes that the world is transient, and it assumes that connections and community are inherently good things. Secondly, what does Facebook assume about the way the world should be? In my eyes, again, Facebook assumes that the world should be connected, that the more connections we have and the more quick those connections can be made, the better. It assumes that our lives should be open books. It assumes that people ought to have open access to us, open access to our pictures, to our ideas, to our thoughts, to our actions, to our lives. And it also assumes that instant and massive amounts of information is an inherent good, that instant and massive information is good. Thirdly, Facebook makes a ton of things possible. It makes possible keeping connected with people that we would naturally, at least before Facebook, simply lose connection with. I have come up into Facebook after, our 10-year anniversary, our 10-year high school graduation happened, 6 years ago now. I've come into Facebook since that time, since our 10-year anniversary of our high school graduation. And in that time, I've reconnected with probably 24 people I graduated with. And in all likelihood, I would never have spoken to the majority of them again unless I saw them at a reunion. And so that it makes that type of reconnection possible. Facebook also makes possible just access to parts of people's lives, probably not their whole life and maybe not even their real life, but it makes possible access to people's lives. As a pastor, I like being able to go on Facebook and see what people are doing. Good churchmen have to be a little bit nosy, and so it's a good thing to be able to see what's going on in the congregation without calling everybody every week. Facebook also makes possible a sense of relational connectivity. And many people have noted that in past generations, if you wanted to feel connected relationally, one of the best places to do that would be to go to the church. And it's quite possible that many people were in church on a weekly basis, not out of obedience to God's command to worship, but out of a sense of wanting to simply connect to people. And as Facebook becomes more and more prevalent, as people get a sense that I can have a relationship, I can have a community online, we're going to see more of those people pull away from church. Those who are simply relating to the church for the relational aspect of it can find it elsewhere. There's other things that Facebook makes possible. It makes possible the enormous waste of time playing Farmville or any number of other games that I don't understand. Facebook also makes some things impossible. Facebook makes impossible privacy. If used fully, Facebook brings us all out into the public and in big and unavoidable ways. And I would also argue that Facebook makes reality impossible. And I've thought about this a lot lately in the past couple of months, that Facebook promotes an identity, an online identity online identity that simply cannot be real. Let me give you an example of what I'm thinking about. When I get on Facebook in the morning, sometimes I'm tempted to write about what I'm doing for the day. Sometimes I don't want people to know. But I have never been tempted to go on Facebook and to say, today I'm really struggling with doubt. Today my wife and I had this argument and it was about this. I've never been tempted to do that because, quite honestly, it's none of your business. And if I did that, I'd get 15 calls during the day. I'd have everybody kind of coming to my door trying to solve my problems. And so what we do when we get on Facebook is we don't put all of our problems up there. We don't air all of our dirty laundry out there, and that's a good thing. But what it means is then the face we present to the world through Facebook is an inherently overly positive face. It's a farce. It's an imitation of what's real. And so I would argue that the lies people portray on Facebook are simply not all the way true. They're parts of the truth, but we don't put our whole selves out there. We don't put up the real us on Facebook, and we can't put the real us up on Facebook. And so we can either fall into the farce and simply keep pretending together that our lives are just full of all these great pictures and cute kids and funny sayings, or we can change what we're doing there. I think the church especially needs to come to the realization that when we're on Facebook, this isn't the whole us, and we're simply using this as a tool for connection and for other lesser things. Okay, I'll get off the high horse. What new forms of culture are created by Facebook? Facebook is itself almost a community. It's almost itself a new culture. It creates forms of culture in terms of online gaming. It has redefined friendship for many people. So it might not be a totally new form of culture, but it has greatly shaped other forms of culture. And then the question, of course, we need to keep asking is, how does this fit into God's wisdom and God's plan for my life? And for me, I think I can use Facebook well. I can put up some things up there that might be interesting. I can keep the church connected, our local church connected on Facebook. I can use it to communicate short things to people. There are teenagers in our church that simply won't respond to emails anymore, and so I have to go on Facebook to get them, to find a way to contact them. I can just get a sense of people's lives on Facebook. I can get a sense of what people are doing and what people are thinking about and what they're excited about, and those are good things. And so it is possible to use Facebook well. It's also possible, if we're honest with each other, to use Facebook poorly. It can be a great distraction. It can be a great waste of time. We can form all these connections that really ultimately have no bearing on the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And so it can be used poorly. I wanted to show you not just these questions, but Tim Challies also has a series of questions in his book, questions designed to ask the technology we're using. We won't go through these in the same way, but you can see how discussions like this would be helpful. To look at your technology, to say to Facebook, Facebook, why were you created? And what is the problem which you are addressing? And whose problem is it? And Facebook, what new problems will you bring? And what are you doing to my heart? These are great questions, questions that you can ask by yourself, questions that are also really helpful to get in a group, to have people together thinking deeply about how this technology is impacting us and perhaps using us. So all of this, again, is geared toward knowing a little bit more of our technology. We want to know it, and then we want to weed out what's bad so that we can cultivate what's good. So in the interests of weeding, I'd like to put these reminders up here as we move on to think about how the internet and social media limits biblical communication. Just some reminders. Reckless words pierce like a sword. The tongue has the power of life and death, and with his mouth the godless man destroys his neighbor. Just because words go through electrons to get online does not mean they are not our words. And we need to take seriously, both for ourselves and for our congregations, how the internet really does limit biblical communication. And so I'd like to think with you about four ways that the internet limits biblical communication. And there's probably more, and if you put them in the comment section or the question section, I'll be sure to mention those. But 4 ways that I've seen in ministry and in the church that the internet limits biblical communication. And the first is speed. Speed, simply put, is the opposite of what good biblical communication looks like. The internet tends toward everything being fast, everything being instant, and if you get in on a Facebook conversation 2 days after the fact, nobody's going to be listening anymore. So if you have something to say, you have to say it right away. But biblically, we ought to be, as James tells us, slow to speak and quick to listen, and that's the opposite of what the internet tends to make us do. So the internet limits us by almost forcing us to be quick, to be speedy. And this also goes especially with texting. We haven't mentioned texting yet. So when you text somebody, you know that they've received your text, and you're expecting that text back within a minute or two. And if it doesn't come, you're offended. We've gotten to the point now where we are so dependent on speed, the speed of communication, to live our lives with each other, and it's really a dangerous thing, biblically. The second way that I see the internet limiting biblical communication is in listening. That truly listening to somebody else is made much more difficult and maybe almost impossible through the internet. Though we may be able to review things that people have written, biblical listening means really hearing somebody as a person, hearing them, hearing their hearts, seeking to know them and to respond to them as a whole person. And it's almost impossible to do online. And several years ago, when I was a younger and foolisher pastor, we had there was somebody in the congregation that I was working through some issues on, and we went back and forth on email, back and forth, long emails that I slaved over composing these emails to convince him of the wrongness of his position. And it turns out that when you write something on an email, people can just ignore it. They don't have to take it seriously. They can focus on one little phrase that you wrote instead of the whole email, and you're never really heard. And so biblical communication means real listening, and that's really, truly difficult to do online and through social media. We can pretend to listen, but to really hear somebody as a person is quite difficult. A third way that the internet limits biblical communication is with accountability, or the lack thereof. And this may be one of the most dangerous things that has come up, and this includes email, it includes Facebook, and it includes commenting on blogs and Twittering and all that. And that is, if I'm going to say something difficult to you, biblically, I have to have the guts to stand up to your face and to say it with love and compassion. But now that I can get online and say it to you behind your back, or say it to you through an email or through Facebook, it has become much easier to be much harsher online. We get online, and simply due to the fact that I'm not staring you in the face, that I don't have that uncomfortable accountability of presence, simply because of that, I can say things, or I'm led to say things that I would never say to your face. I don't know how many emails I've gotten, just as a pastor, as a friend, that have been truly offensive things, that I'm sure, knowing the people who sent them, they never would have said that if they were looking at me in my face. They would have found a better way to say that, because face-to-face, there's a real accountability there. And this is simply a limit that I don't know that the internet is going to overcome. Until webcams and getting online and looking at somebody gets much better, we're still not going to be able to look somebody in the face and really have to deal with them as a person and not as an avatar or electrons. And then finally, a final limit that internet puts on biblical communication is that of privacy, because everything online tends toward the loss of privacy. And we've just seen another representative today, if you've seen the news, representative who's gotten in trouble for something, that some picture that was or wasn't taken on his Twitter account wasn't sent out. But the reality is, everything we do online tends toward the lack of privacy or the loss of privacy. And biblically speaking, privacy is a good thing. It is good to keep things that should be between you and your wife. It's not good to get online and hash those arguments out in front of the public. So we as a church need to do better at putting fences up around our private lives and not letting people into those. And that doesn't mean as preachers and pastors we can't be real. We can be real when we're talking to people face to face. We can be real when we're preaching in church. But we shouldn't get on our blogs and we shouldn't get on Facebook and say, here are all the problems I'm having, help me solve these. We need to keep what is private, private. So there are other ways, I'm sure, but the internet does limit biblical communication, and therefore I'd like to ask with you the great question that should have been on all our bracelets 10 years ago. HWJE, how would Jesus email? This is an article I've been wanting to write for a while, so if any of you want to write it, feel free to take it and run with it. How would Jesus use this? How would Jesus use Facebook? How would Jesus use tweeting? So some ideas I want to lay out before you just to continue this part of the conversation. First of all, I really think Jesus would recognize and work within the limitations of each medium. Each medium has limitations and possibilities. And if we don't recognize those limitations, we're going to try to do something with that medium that it simply cannot handle. On my desk in front of me, I have a water bottle and I have a coffee mug. The coffee mug is significantly smaller than my water bottle. And if I were to open my water bottle and pour out all the contents into my coffee mug, it simply wouldn't hold it. The coffee mug simply is not designed to hold that much water. And so I would argue that the internet and electronic means of communication simply are not weighty enough to hold matters of the heart, especially difficult matters of the heart. Hard words must be face-to-face. And I've broken this mandate in the past, and you probably have too, but we have to hear it, and we have to teach the people of God this. If we're going to rebuke somebody, we have to be man enough, or woman enough as the case may be, to tell it to their face. It is a cowardly thing to rebuke somebody over email or on Facebook or by Twitter or text. It is cowardly, and it just doesn't work. Because when you text me, when you email me, I'm going to hear the very worst version of that rebuke. And I won't be able to hear your love. I won't be able to hear your care. I won't get to see you in pain as you rebuke me, as you ought to be. So hard words have to be face-to-face. We cannot use this medium to rebuke the people of God. We can't do it. At the very least, we ought to call people on the phone and have the guts to talk to them and let them hear our voice, hopefully let them see our face. But we can use it, and we can use the opportunities that social media gives us for all sorts of things, for short notes of thank yous, short notes of encouragement, I'm praying for you, things that can't be misunderstood, can't be misrepresented. You can use this for great things throughout the day. It is a blessing to get a short note from somebody that you respect or somebody that you love who's saying, thinking about you, was praying this for you today. That's it. That's awesome. That's a wonderful thing, and we can use these opportunities to encourage people to show thankfulness. We can also use it to enjoy life together. There is a humor on Facebook that I really appreciate, humor that's not deprecating, but humor that's just enjoying life together. That's great, and I think that can glorify God. I also think that Jesus would not CC or BCC anything. I think Jesus would be very careful about forwarding things, about CCing anything, or blind copying anything. We have to be very, very careful with what we do, with what we write, knowing that anything we put out there can never be brought back to us. In a sense, it's always on permanent public record. But just as conscientious and loving believers, we need to be careful with what other people write. If somebody does send us a nasty email, we shouldn't go and send it on to 5 more people to say, can you believe what he just said? Because then we've just become part of the problem. So we need and can use email and Facebook and maybe even Twittering, but that's a different discussion. Maybe even Twittering, we can use it for good, and we can avoid evil if we recognize the limitations that each of these medium present to us. So I would be interested in hearing more about what you think in terms of opportunities to use these things for good. And I want to go on to another area of problems that social media and the internet present to us. And I simply do this because we simply would not be facing reality if we didn't talk about this together today. And that is, whenever we get online and wherever we go, we are facing a virtual flood of lewdness. And it's almost inescapable. It's probably not inescapable, but it is almost inescapable. And just to remind us before we think about it, what Jesus says to us about these things. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Walk by the Spirit, you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Job's confession, I've made a covenant with my eyes. How could I gaze at a virgin? How could I look longingly at a virgin? But sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you. And we're not even going to talk about covetousness today and what the internet does to provoke our hearts to covet. But it does often provoke our hearts toward sexual immorality and toward all kinds of impurity. The reality is, when I get opportunities to talk to men, especially young men in our congregation, whenever I'm in private conversations with them, I make it a point to always ask them about their online lives, about involvement with pornography and involvement with things that produce or foster lust. And the reality is, when they tell me that they're not struggling with it, I'm so cynical at this point that I assume they're lying. And I shouldn't do that. I probably shouldn't do that when we're talking to Christian brothers. But so many young men, and not even young men anymore, are trapped or giving themselves over to this sin. And it has simply become so easy to be trapped by Satan, to be trapped by our own temptations. So what do we do? What do we do? Fighting pornography is a whole nother webinar, but just a few things before we move on. We need to use the means of grace to fight sin, and not tricks. There's so many tricks. There's those little things we can do, and those are fine. But ultimately, what people need is faith and love for Jesus, and that comes through the means of grace. And we need to get people in that river where the Holy Spirit is moving, so that they would be brought to love Jesus more than they love their own sins. They would be brought to trust Jesus more than they trust their own inclinations. We also need to make sure that people are getting the help that God gives through the church. One of the greatest things Satan has done to the church, against the church, is to convince us, when we fight this particular sin, that we are the only ones. And the more we can remain, the more he can keep us silent, the more he can keep us isolated in this one particular area, the less we're ever going to deal with it. And so especially you who are pastors, leaders in the church, you have to be talking to the young men in your church about this. If you're not, you're simply unfaithful in this one area. You're simply not facing reality, and we have to bring people into the help that God gives through the church. One of the other helps that God gives is good software. All of my computers have Covenant Eyes on them. It's a program that records wherever you go and ranks it according to the potential lust factor or whatever, and emails it to an accountability partner. I receive these reports from 4 or 5 different guys in the congregation every week. XXXchurch.com has a similar type of software. I haven't tested that one, though. More than anything, though, when we fight this problem online, the great call for us is to develop the right passions. We need to love and we need to hate the right things. And when I'm online, or when a young man's online looking at something they shouldn't look at, it's because they're not trusting Jesus. They're not believing his word, and they love themselves more than they love Jesus. So the answer isn't the right software. The answer isn't an accountability partner. The answer is faith and trust and love for Jesus, and that's what we need to be building in the people of God. Right. Well, like I said, I didn't want to spend too much time on that, but we can't. As all of you know, we can't talk about the internet without talking about that. We would be just unfaithful. And one more thing I wanted to mention in terms of weeding out the bad when we get online, a great quote from Carr's book, The Shallows. And this really speaks to the thesis of his book. And he writes that the development of a well-rounded mind requires an ability to find and to parse a wide range of information and a capacity for open-ended reflection. That is, a good mind can think deeply and at length about certain things. There needs to be time for efficient data collection, and that's what the internet is really good at. And there needs to be time for inefficient contemplation, and that's what the internet is truly bad at. There's no time in social media, there's no time online to do inefficient contemplation, time to operate the machine, and time to sit idly in the garden. The problem today is that we're losing our ability to strike a balance between those two very different states of mind. Mentally, we're in perpetual locomotion. And I can't recommend Carr's book enough, just because he paints so powerfully the picture of almost anybody who's living their life more and more online. He writes at the beginning of the book, I found myself more and more unable to even read a book from front to back because I just can't think still that long. And I find that true for myself. If I spend too much time online, it's very hard to follow an argument. And for the people who are in the pews every week and listening to sermons, it's very striking. It should be striking to all of the preachers here that when they listen to a sermon, that is the only time, likely the only time that week, that they have had to sit and to follow somebody else's line of thought for 40 minutes. It's the only time they're doing that. And that's a dangerous thing. We've got to get people reading and thinking more deeply. By the way, if you want a short version of Carr's book, you can look up the article that was in the Atlantic several years ago called, Is Google Making Us Stupid? Is Google making us stupid? And of course the answer is yes, probably. So all of that is for the sake of weeding. All of that's the bad stuff. And we have to do that before we can talk about cultivating and the benefits that technology can bring to the church and to the kingdom. Of course, there are huge, huge benefits to what Jesus can do with technology in the church. First of all, technology and social media allows us to multiply labor. We can do the simple things, the innocuous things of life. We can do them more easily, more quickly. I can put together a bulletin now far more quickly than we could have 20 years ago. I can save it, and we can just make a few changes. Every week it takes us less time to do it. I'm on Facebook, and I can connect. I can let people know about prayer requests through email far more quickly and far more efficiently than we ever could have through a telephone tree. We may have lost something of the human connection, but I think we've gained in actually getting more people praying all at once through email. So with that, with multiplying of labor, we get extraordinary communication. We can talk to people around the world. How awesome is it that Daniel Ferris can Facebook us from Kenya to say, hey, we're okay, keep praying for these things, we're doing fine here in Kenya. That is a wonderful thing. It's an amazing thing that our forefathers in the faith would have loved to see, that kind of connection, making the world smaller so that we can send more and more people out and still stay connected to them. Online media can also result in greater visibility for the church. Churches ought to have a Facebook page. They ought to be connected there, just sharing with what's going on, putting your calendar up there. It's one more place to basically put your sign out by the road where people are going to drive by it. The internet technology gives us fast access to great learning. It's not lost on me that we're doing the seminar online, and it would have been virtually impossible for all of us to get together today and to talk about this face to face. So this is a good thing that we can do today. Education, there's also an equalizing of education across the board. Technology allows us to bring great education to poor or oppressed believers around the world, and that's a good thing as well. So there are many other ways too that we could cultivate. And then finally, I wanted to bring you to a few practical things to do. If you like some application, if you like some practical application at the end, here it is. You can today make a list of the communication tools that are available to you on a daily basis. Phone, email, written letters, face-to-face conversations, twittering, whatever. Make that list, and then with each one on the list, answer these questions. What types of communication can be handled by each tool? It is no sin for me to text my wife to ask her how many gallons of milk to buy. It is a very problematic thing to text her to say, hey, let's talk about that fight we had last night. That's just not right. Conversely, what types of communication should be left to other tools? And then how can we use the tools God has given us to increase efficiency in little things to get to the more important things? So again, these are ways to practice. We've gone through knowing and a little bit of weeding, and now we're on to cultivating. What can I do? What can I do better? What can I do faster and get to the more important things of life with all that God's given me? How can I use these tools to increase efficiency? The picture that's up there, we are at a, let's see, I'll explain that real quick. That picture, as some of you know, is Norm Abram. Norm Abram was on the New Yankee Workshop for a couple of decades on PBS. He just was it's just a woodworking show that I love to watch all the time. And Norm Abram often got all sorts of free power tools from great companies like Delta and Powermatic. And the tour of his shop was like it was a powerful tour of every tool that a woodworker would want. And he had the fastest way to do everything. And there are some people in the woodworking world that refer to themselves as Normites. And there are other people in the woodworking world that refer to themselves as Neanderthals, who believe that the best woodworking is done all by hand. And we're gonna plane all of our boards by hand instead of using a planer. We are not Neanderthals. We can go with Norm Abram. We can do things the best and the fastest way that we can do them, as long as we don't lose the things that God has given us to lose, especially our connections to people. So now I'm going to take a deep breath. This is a lot that we've laid out. Like I said, this is way too broad a topic to really get into any great depth. But biblically, our great call, and if I can leave anything with you, is simply to encourage you on the path of discernment. We have to be practicing discernment, cutting between what is good and what is bad every day. So that's where I'll leave us. I think we'll have a little bit of a time for a break, and then we'll come back in just a few minutes and work through some questions that you sent to me. Thanks.
That we do. Thank you, Jared. And now is the time, folks, for you to use that little chat box on the left side of your screen. Quite a few of you have already sent over some questions, which I have emailed to Jared. The wonders of technology. It's funny, we're sitting here talking about this today, and Jared is in West Lafayette, and I'm here in Pittsburgh, and you are all over the country and the world. And yet we can still share this information. So go ahead, use the chat box while I'm just delaying for a couple of minutes so Jared can take a look at some of the questions that he has right now. And then I did want to mention we have some webinars coming up. The one I specifically wanted to highlight right now takes place on August the 4th, and that is Dr. Scipione, the director of the Biblical Counseling Institute here at RPTS. And he wanted to do a webinar just for you, and that is answering questions that you all have, specifically in the areas of ministry and relationships and discipling that you have. So this would be a wonderful time for you to be able to send questions over ahead of time. You can send them to me, and we'll have a screen here in a minute that shows you how you can do that. But it will be a webinar designed with content specifically tailored to the individuals listening. And I encourage you to tune back in when we get to that in August. And just as a reminder, the first Thursday of every month, again, courtesy of RP Missions, we have these webinars scheduled. Jared, do you have a couple of answers for questions?
Sure, we'll take a shot. These are some good questions. Here's a first one that was sent actually a little while ago. To what extent should Christians use social media tools and just general internet tools to connect, engage, build relationships, and share the good news of Jesus Christ with non-Christians, and how could this practically be lived out? So the question again is, to what extent can we use these tools that God's given us to share the gospel? How can we live that out? And of course, my answer hopefully will be a little bit balanced. Of course, this is a great tool, and we can use it basically however you can dream to use it to get the word out in a way that's efficient, in a way that's loving, but never, never, never at the expense of a face-to-face conversation. The internet these things we do online, these conversations we have online on Facebook, the debates we have, will never be able to carry the same impact of a real face-to-face relationship. And so if it's impossible, if there's somebody that you can't connect with face-to-face, to connect with them online and to get them some good information, some good reading, great. Far more valuable. I would say if you had to choose between 100 internet, sending tracts to 100 people through the internet and having one conversation with somebody face-to-face, I will choose that conversation every time. because it's far more important. That's how we're built to relate to each other. So yes, use the tools, but understand their limitations and always gear the tools toward getting that face-to-face conversation. So there's ways we could do that. And I say this too because over the past, as I've been thinking about this and praying about this over the past few years, I have never seen, this is anecdotal of course, but I have never seen anybody convinced of something that they were opposed to, anything serious. I've never seen a mind change about anything serious because of the internet. I've tried email dialogues about very serious things with people, and I've never ever convinced anybody of it. I've had these huge debates in the comment section of blogs, and I've never seen anybody say I was wrong and now I'm on your side. I'm sure it's happened, but I've never seen it. I have seen people in face-to-face conversations be brought to the Word of God, be brought to great change. I've seen that all the time. In fact, that's one of the, I guess that's the business I'm in, is seeing people change for Christ. It just doesn't happen that much online, and that's, in my mind, that's just the reality of it. I could be wrong. People could give other anecdotal evidence to the contrary, but that's my sense of it. So here's another question in terms of rebuking. In terms of rebuking people through internet, what about Paul rebuking the church via letters and epistles? What about over the phone? Again, rebuking needs to take place face to face. You go to that person. You don't pick up the phone, but you go to the person. If you can't do that, the phone is a fine second option. And I would note that Paul's letters were vastly different than our emails. They had the authority of the Holy Spirit. They were not read in private. They were read in public, and they were used as a sermon. They were preached or prophesied, as it were, to the congregation, and vastly different than how we receive emails, how we receive Twitters, how we receive things on Facebook. So I think it's a great question. I think the difference, though, is so striking that we can't really use Paul's example of writing rebukes to justify our doing the same. Another question was asking for a little bit more on how Facebook is a farce, and this is a good kind of counter to that. So this person said, when I go outside, I put on my game face when I go out and talk to friends. Basically, I'm never bearing my whole soul wherever I go. And I'm always presenting some sort of game face. I'm always presenting some sort of farce. And I would say I agree with that. So what we're dealing with is not an either or, but it's a continuum of how fake we're being. And I would argue that face to face, even if you're putting on a game face, you still have to be far more real than we ever are on Facebook. So again, that's just my argument. That's my sense of things, that Facebook kind of prevents us from being real. That is, I might have my game face on when I go out, but when I meet somebody I want to talk to, I can really pour my heart out to them, and they can love me, and I can love them, and they can listen, and I can listen. I can't do that. I can't go on Facebook if I'm having a bad day and put myself out there. I still have to go to somebody that I love and that can handle my problems with me. So I guess that's how I'd answer that, and would welcome any follow-up to that.
Jared, we'll give you another minute here, Jared, just to check a couple others that I've forwarded over to you.
Okay.
And folks, you'll see on your screen the upcoming webinars that we have scheduled in July. Pastor Harry Metzger here in Pittsburgh will be talking about evangelism. And then August 4th, as we mentioned earlier, Dr. Scipione. Again, you can send your questions, and you see my email address there, and we'll make sure that Dr. Scipione gets those. That's the email address would be msampson@rpts.edu. And then I have our September webinar there. Will the real Dietrich Bonhoeffer please stand up? Liberal or conservative? Christology, a test case. And this will be Pastor Jeff Stuyvesant of Grace Reformed Presbyterian Church in Gibsonia speaking on this topic. Jared, what else do you have for us?
Sure. I got this is a really good question. I really appreciate this because I think it's where a lot of us are. For a person that struggles with using social media well, using it in moderation, but needs to be on a computer for many hours a day for a job, how would you advise that she maintain a balance when avoidance isn't an option? And I think that's, like I said, I think that's true maybe for everybody who's listening, or at least for most people who are listening, that our lives revolve around this screen right now. And for many of us, we can't really get away from it. So how do we achieve balance when I can't just run away? And running away isn't the necessary right answer either. First of all, I think we need to discern what balance looks like. We need to figure out what that balance is in order to pursue it. I use Chrome as my web browser. It's been having some problems lately, but I've been using Chrome as my web browser. And recently, I found that there's a plug-in for Chrome. There's also one for Firefox that allows you to go in and to set the limit of time that you are going to give yourself to spend on any certain website during the workday or during the whole day. It's very customizable. I wish I had the name of these, but if you're interested, just shoot me an email. I'll find it. And you can go on and you can decide I'm not going to spend more than a half hour on Facebook during the workday. And so I'm going to set that, and when you're done, then you're done. Now, is there a way around that? Of course, but it's sort of an external accountability to your goals that you've already set. I think it's also good to realize not just in terms of time, but in terms of content. What am I willing to put online about my life? Some people do share way too much. Some people do put out way too much things that are not appropriate. And then all your friends and your pastor are left wondering, am I supposed to call them and help them through this or not? We need to discern what we're going to put out there ahead of time before it comes up. So I think there's good technological ways to help us maintain that balance. I also think if this is a real problem, stopping for a while can be really helpful. There's no righteousness in being on Facebook if there's no righteousness in being off Facebook. But if it's becoming a problem, if it's becoming an idol, just cut it out. Just stop doing it for a while. Ultimately, you can still live life without your Facebook account, without your Twitter account. You won't miss all that much, is the reality. So if it is a problem, if you need to kind of gain that perspective of space, I would say just get out of it for a while. Get out of it for a couple months. A while ago, I took a month break from the internet. I did email, and that was it. I did email. I think I paid bills online, and I didn't do anything else online. And I remember having to go to the actual library to look something up once, and it was quite the thing, quite the event for me. But it helped me just to gain perspective. We don't need this stuff, but it is a helpful tool, and so getting away from it for a while can be really helpful. Mark, that's my last question, I think.
Very good. And this webinar has been recorded. You can check the RPTS website later today. We'll have the link up so you can not only listen again, but you'll be able to see all the slides also, and you can feel free to refer friends that way. Jared, you said I sounded like an airline pilot. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not.
It's a great thing.
Okay, because frequently they're unintelligible, so that would not be such a good thing. But in that vein, we have landed. Welcome to Pittsburgh or whatever town you happen to be in, and we hope you enjoyed your flight. And remember us the first Thursday of next month, and we'll have another webinar then. Thanks for joining us today. God bless, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Mark.